Hello, mortals. It is good to be back! To bring the new subscribers amongst us up to date, greetings my lovelies. I am Terrence Bellerophon Boot, and I used to be a wizard. I went to school in Scotland, where I was sorted into the indisputably best and brightest house, and was super crazy popular with everyone all the time. In my final year, I fought valiantly in a battle against evil and was absolutely not traumatized in any way. I then made a half-hearted attempt to annex a D-list YouTube channel, eventually putting my differences with the former host aside to work together, discovered that the literal creator of my world was trying her best to appoint herself the Queen of Turfdom, renounced my heritage. Some might say conveniently discovered that when my father and stepmother had told me that I was a half-blood, they were actually referring to a deity, not a wizard. Went to study at Camp Half-Blood, felt a little weird being the only camper in his 40s who decided that orange wasn't his color, but got down with some cool hero stuff for some fearsome monsters while I waited for an appropriate time to make my triumphant return to social media. Enter the 2023 adaptation of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Starting at the beginning, Rick Riordan is an American author who, while not unsuccessful in his other works, found fame and fortune through his young adult Percy Jackson novels. The popular gimmick of said novels being that they take place in a world full of modernized versions of ancient Greek myths, legends, and religions. While he's not aware of this at the start of the story, young Percy is a half-human, half-god offspring of Poseidon, the Lord of the Sea, a heritage that comes with a fuck-ton of baggage, as we will get into later. 2010 saw the release of a movie adaptation of the first book in the series that was almost universally panned by Percy Jackson fans for dumbing down the plot and characters, mismanaging the story, and in general, missing the point of Riordan's writing on a fundamental level. Learning nothing from this, they made a sequel adapting his second book 3 years later and repeated most of the same mistakes all over again. Amusingly, while he wasn't outright rude about it, Riordan was more willing than most authors to express disappointment in the mess they made out of his IP, which I personally found quite cathartic. Alas, that was all of the on-screen presence that young Mr. Jackson would have for the next decade or so, until, to much online rejoicing, Riordan announced that Disney had agreed to give everyone's favorite demigod a second chance with a TV series that he would be directly involved in this time around. Jonathan Steinberg and Dan Schultz joined him as showrunners, Walker Scobell was announced as the titular Percy, and Leah Savard-Jeffries and Ariane Shimhadri got the important roles of his best friends Annabeth and Grover. As of this video's recording, the first 2 episodes are streamable on Disney Plus, with the rest due on a weekly schedule. So, let's see if Poseidon's son got to make the most of this second chance. Let's talk adaptation. Promisingly, the show starts with an almost direct quote from the book, as Percy warns audiences that being a half-blood isn't all that great when you get right down to it. We then see a blessedly age-appropriate Percy trying to struggle his way through school despite his rampant dyslexia and ADHD, helped by his good friend Grover and mildly hindered by a string of confusing visions involving mythological creatures. While out on a field trip to a museum with his favorite teacher, a disabled historian named Brunner, and his least favorite teacher, a leather jacket-wearing mathematician by the name of Dodds, Percy loses his temper with a school bully and somehow blasts her into a fountain without actually touching her. After witnessing this, Mrs. Dobbs transforms into a hideous creature and attempts to assault him, but is defeated when the pen that Mr. Brunner just gave Percy turns into a bronze sword and completely vaporizes her after a good shanking. Immediately afterwards, everyone at the school seems to forget that Mrs. Dobbs ever existed, so Percy is off the hook there, but is still expelled for the impromptu baptism. Returning home to his loving mother and shitty stepfather, Percy is informed that he and his mama are heading to a seaside cabin for a bit to decompress. However, Grover turns up at their door, revealed to Percy at last to be a goat-legged satyr of all things. He bears a warning that Percy is in immediate danger because his status as a half-blood is out there now, and a ton of monsters will be heading right for him with homicidal intent. And indeed, the fabled Minotaur, Bullman comes to wreck shit and squeezes Percy's mother so hard she appears to burst into a shower of golden light. Understandably a tad upset about this, Percy fights and slays the beast with its own horn just before passing out, waking a short while later in what is revealed to be Camp Half-Blood, a training ground for the half-god offspring of the Greek pantheon. Percy meets the director Mr. D, the god Dionysus, temporarily exiled from Olympus and banned from drinking, and one of the camp teachers, Mr. Brunner, who it turns out is actually the legendary centaur Chiron. They fill Percy in on the whole the Greek gods are real, they're still around and still total fuckboys stuff, and get him settled in the Hermes cabin, where they send all the unclaimed half-bloods to hang out. Then he meets Luke, the older, devilishly handsome and talented son of the messenger god. Clarice, a daughter of the war god Ares, attempts to haze the new kids with a traditional swirly, but is defeated by Percy's budding water powers, which impress Annabeth, the daughter of Athena, who's on the lookout for someone who could potentially help her with getting assigned an official camp quest and venturing out into the wide world. During a violent game of Capture the Flag, Percy, an unwitting diversion for the blue team, defeats Clarice and her cronies yet again, breaking her magical spear in the process. He is then officially claimed by Poseidon, which is a big deal because the big three Olympic gods, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, had sworn an oath not to sire any more mortal children for various reasons. Mr. D and Mr. C then tell Percy there's some family strife going on up on Olympus, as Zeus's uber-powerful Master Thunderbolt has been stolen, and the boss man suspects that Percy performed the deed at his father's behest. However, they suspect that Hades is behind the whole thing, and quest Percy with traveling to the underworld to retrieve it and preventing a war between the gods. I was impressed, though not entirely surprised considering the writer, with the film's attention to the little details from the book. Mrs. Dodd's leather jacket, for example, at first odd-looking on a mature lady, then revealed to be the mist obscuring her bat-like wings. And the mist itself, of course, an extremely useful narrative device, as it removes the need to constantly come up with reasons why regular people don't notice the wild shit going on around them. I think this show is doing a really good job of recreating Percy's inconsistent mix of incompetence and extreme badassery, as he's the kind of hero who rises to the occasion in the moment but makes a real mess out of things the rest of the time. They also really captured his continuous sense of mild bewilderment. I love this kid, but God bless him, he is an absolute maximum of 80% aware of what's going on around him at any given moment. Everyone kind of being on Percy's arse all the time is carried over as well. I mentioned this in a video recently, but validating the adolescent feeling that everyone's being extremely unfair to you in particular is a popular trope in fiction for the youth. Not including direct appearances from any of the gods besides Dionysus was also a nice book-accurate touch. It might seem weird to not show such important characters until right at the end, but that's just how it was in the book. They were distant motherfuckers from start to almost finish. And finally, I've checked ahead and it looks like the episodes are named after Riordan's amusing choice of chapter titles, which is a good sign for the rest of the show. Oh, and in case any long-time fans of the show were wondering, yes, I had the Ravenclaw tattoo removed. It wasn't particularly difficult, I'm fucking magic. For the most part, I would describe the changes I clocked in these opening episodes as either fairly inconsequential or just interesting. I mean, there's a bunch of things that haven't shown up yet, but I'm going to give this show the benefit of the doubt and assume they've just been shifted to a little later in the story. Regarding the inconsequential that I'm only mentioning for the sake of thoroughness, Chiron gives Percy Riptide before Mrs. Dodds goes full fury on him, meaning there's fewer hints that he's in on the whole God World thing until he shows up in half-horse form at camp. Said fury attack takes place right in front of everyone now instead of in a secluded room in the museum. However, the books firmly establish that the mist can hide even the most extreme examples of the supernatural from humans, so it's not a lawbreaker or anything like that. There's a thunderstorm in a camp that was originally perpetually nice on account of Thalia's tree protecting them from even the weather. Dionysus briefly fucks with Percy, pretending to be his father, which was honestly fucking hilarious. They held back the full reveal of Annabeth for a little longer to give her a more dramatic entrance. As one of the most consistent descriptions of Annabeth was her having blonde hair and grey eyes, it is pretty safe to say that she was a white girl originally, but I can't imagine how her race could possibly impact the story, so it's safe to say all of those jackasses online who were objecting to this had motivations other than book loyalty. They neglected to mention that World War II was part of the official reason for the Big Three swearing off impregnating humans, and the resulting implication that Hitler was a son of Hades. They seem to be playing up Percy's desire to get a face-to-face with his dad somewhat, and to this end, introduce some sort of tangible magical point system in Camp Half-Blood called Glory, and and had Percy become obsessed with earning enough of it to force Poseidon to make a visit. This is fairly harmless for now, but I do hope that daddy issues don't become Percy's whole personality going forward, if for no other reason than that's kind of Luke's thing. Moving on to the more interesting stuff, Grover's currently in a bit of a Schrodinger's change situation, as what I've picked up on so far could be an indication of a significant character shift, or just a few instances of these showrunners adding a little flavor to the episodes. Everyone's favorite satyr attempted to take the blame for the fountain incident in the book and stood by Percy afterwards. In the show, he straight up snitches on his friend, which seems like a double betrayal because at that point in the story, Percy genuinely believes that he couldn't have done it. It's later revealed that he did this for Percy's own good, as he had to get him out of the school before more monsters showed up. Later, Grover appears to defy the wishes of Mr. D and Chiron to tell Percy that his mother is still alive in the underworld, but keep in mind that Grover needs Percy to go on this quest so he can tag along and get his license to go and search for Pan, something that he has yet to reveal to Percy. Now, like I said, this could just be a little extra drama for the opening of the show, but it will be interesting to see if they're actually a sign that the sweet cinnamon roll who could never lie to Percy in the books is a little bit more manipulative here. Percy's mother also gave me pause regarding where they might be going with her. She decides to explain Percy's heritage to him at the cabin before Grover shows up, giving her more agency in the matter than in the books, where the revelation was forced on them by the arrival of the Minotaur. Similarly, she makes a more active choice to face down the big beefy boy instead of just getting grabbed on the outskirts of camp. She also stands up to her husband, Smelly Gabe, yelling back at him when he shouts and staring him down until he says please and stuff like that. The reason this caught my attention is this stuff has the potential to undercut her original character arc if the show decides to stick to it. Ms. Jackson was never a weak person in the book, but she was a little passive until the final chapters when she says to Percy, "Don't try to save me, I need to learn to save myself," and then she fucking does. And speaking of which, I am a little concerned that this version of Gabe, while an obvious loser and kind of a jerk, does not seem to be as irredeemably evil or abusive as his written counterpart. And because Ms. Jackson is willing to match him in unnecessary yelling, it almost seems like they're either just expressing affection in a weird way or have an equally unhealthy relationship. Such improvement as a person is only really a problem because if they keep this up, I am not entirely sure that this version of him would deserve to meet the same fate as he does in the book. If you know, you know. And last but not least, they didn't establish that Percy gets an epic power boost from being in some sort of body of water when he fights, instead having him defeat Clarice and her goons entirely using his own skill, then having Annabeth shove him in the water to test her theory about his lineage. As this particular power set comes back in the final confrontation, I guess we're going to have to wait and see if this means it's been removed altogether, is going to be set up a little later, or they've just decided to keep it to be a big reveal at the end. Final thoughts, and also a few notes. So far as an adaptation, it's as close to perfect as I personally think it could possibly have been. The plot is bang on, the characters feel very much like their book counterparts, and what changes there were don't impact anything essential. Indeed, the only issues I can find with it don't involve the books at all, and if you wouldn't mind indulging me, I thought I might air a few of those out before we part ways. My single biggest complaint is that Scobell's performance seems a little subdued? Don't get me wrong, I absolutely don't need or want people to scream their way through an entire series, but Percy is completely silent while being tackled to the ground by a Fury, witnessing his mother's apparent death, and during his epic battle with the Minotaur. Not one shout, cry, or even a yelp. I'm inclined to think this was a directorial choice rather than a failure of acting, because it applies to the whole dang cast. Percy, his mother, and Grover make nary a peep as they plow their car headlong into a fucking semi. It's just weird. It's almost certainly not this, but my personal headcanon is it's an overcorrection for Logan Lerman mugging his way through two terrible movies. It amused me that even with Disney money behind it, a TV show will always try to cut some corners to save on budget, so there was a suspicious amount of things in the foreground of shots that conveniently removed the need to CGI in Grover's goat legs. Okay, now this is going to come off pretty mean even for me, but there's just something about the exact pitch of Walker Scobell's voice that makes him sound, at least to me, more like an adult who's inhaled helium than a lad whose voice hasn't dropped yet, and it's really distracting.
Oh, no, it's fine. I mean, you're a horse. My father won't talk to me unless I get him a drink.
Good luck unhearing that. Little things bothered me too, like Well, this is hard to explain, but none of the actors move like they're used to wearing armor, you know? I don't think they put in the time to practice that enough, so they all look a little awkward while walking around. And did anyone else notice that not one person's helmet fitted them? Everyone's chins and noses were poking out, presumably so we could see more of the actors' faces, which, you know, is fair from a cinematography point of view, but kind of defeats the entire point of wearing a fucking helmet. And look at this, Luke's cheap-ass prop sword is straight up bent to hell here. I mean, it's possible that this was intentional, as it was right after a fight, but I guess that just means Camp Half-Blood has really, really shitty equipment. And not for nothing, but the flossing gag was very much a how do you do, fellow kids moment. But yeah, overall, and certainly adaptation-wise, it is so far so good. If you'd like me to see if this streak continues, sound off in the comments, and I will consider sticking around a little longer to continue this Percy Jacksonathon, or whatever much better name for it you guys come up with. Happy holidays, mortals! Like, share, sub, check out the exclusive content on Patreon, and I might see you soon. Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, April Mack, Shelby Holtz, and Curtis Charles Jr. And a big thank you to this video's editor, Sophia Ricciardi. Links to her work in the video description. So Terry, you're very distracting. Come here, baby. Come here. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Oh, what's that squeak? I'm sorry. Goodness gracious. Just made the, like a guinea pig. I squeezed you in just the wrong way. I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. Poor baby. You forgive me? Huh? Hope so.